The stars outside the cockpit were bright enough to pierce the darkness. Jax Varin stared through the shimmering void, sweat pooling on his brow as he wrestled with the battered flight controls. The console flickered and spat sparks, the oxygen alarm wailing like a desperate creature. He was losing altitude, losing atmospheric balance, losing hope. With each passing moment, the battered hull of his ship, the Fortune's Echo, plunged deeper toward the looming orb that was the outlaw moon known as Kareth. It was not his proudest moment. He had been on the run for days, ever since that ill-fated job on the planet Kesper Station. The Imperium had placed a bounty on his head for cargo theft, and the Henoth Syndicate demanded a slice of his hide for an unpaid debt. Jax wanted nothing more than to vanish, but fate had conspired otherwise. Delivering him to Kareth, he grimaced at the sparks showering his cockpit. The flight stabilizers were gone, and the atmospheric readouts scrolled by in frantic red lines of condemnation. With trembling fingers, he keyed in an emergency maneuver. G-forces pressed his spine into the pilot's seat as the Fortune's Echo jolted, bucking like a wounded beast. The hull groaned and threatened to shear. A swirl of dust-laden clouds enveloped the craft. Jax caught only fleeting glimpses of rocky plains and jagged peaks before the engine stuttered. The moan of overstressed metal howled through the vessel, the ship's bones creaking like a doomed sailing galleon of old Earth legends. In the final moments before impact, Jax braced himself, gritting his teeth, cursing the day he ever gambled on escaping the bounty. Then came the crash. Metal tore and shrieked as the Fortune's Echo smashed into the ground. The world spun, dust rose, and Jax's vision danced with swirling motes of half-light. He lost all sense of direction, feeling only the scalding burn of the harness across his chest. When at last, everything slowed, the ship came to an agonizing, scraping halt among twisted heaps of refuse, battered hull lying in a crater of debris. For a few seconds, Jax could not breathe. A dull roar filled his ears. He coughed, struggling for air in the smoke-shrouded cockpit. With trembling hands, he unlatched his harness, dropping heavily onto the buckled floor plating. The overhead lights flickered. Darkness stretched beyond the cracked viewport, revealing a land of scattered wreckage, rusted starship hulls, dismembered wings, scraps from centuries of derelict craft. The place stank of engine fumes and chemical spills. There was no time to rest. Jax snatched the emergency kit from beneath his seat, yanked open the half-jammed cockpit door, and stumbled into the open. The acrid smell of scorching metal assaulted his senses, his boots crunching over jagged bits of smoldering debris. His battered body demanded respite. Yet he forced himself onward, desperate to put distance between himself and the bright flames pouring out of the shattered thrusters. The unpredictable environment of Kareth, a place notorious for lawless scrappers and hidden criminals, did nothing to calm his nerves. With labored breath, Jax surveyed the horizon. A faint glow from the small Kareth sun lit the sky, revealing hills and ridges formed from stacked starship junk. It looked like a graveyard for 1,000 vessels. And in the distance, across a sea of twisted iron, a single building rose, an old, rusted workshop, crowned with a flickering neon sign, a chance at shelter, perhaps. In that moment, the world tilted under Jax's feet. He felt his knees buckle, every muscle screaming in protest, the throbbing pain in his side threatening to blot out consciousness. The corners of his vision darkened. Collapsing to the scorched earth, he whispered a fractured prayer to whichever cosmic powers might still watch over desperate men. And then he saw a silhouette tall, broad, with a snout or muzzle of some kind, alien, coming closer. He tried to reach for his sidearm, but his arm would not respond. Shadows lengthened as the figure bent down, rummaging around him, muttering in a language he only half recognized. Then, with a rough yank, the figure hoisted him over a shoulder as though he weighed no more than a child. Jax wanted to protest, to push away, but a wave of blackness consumed him. And so it was that Jax Varin came into the hands of the alien mechanic named Thira in the scrapyard of Kareth, at the lowest point in his life, when his ship lay in ruins and the bounty on his head threatened everything he had left. He awoke to the sound of clanking metal, half expecting to be bound in the hold of a bounty hunter's ship. But as Jax's vision cleared, he found himself inside a cramped workshop that stank of grease, hot plasma torches, and old oil. He was lying on a makeshift cot propped against the corrugated wall, the mattress more lumps than cushion. Cables and scraps of junk were strewn haphazardly across the floor, and the overhead lamp flickered with a sickly green glow. His body ached. He tested each limb in turn and found that, aside from bruises, he was largely intact. Across the workshop, he glimpsed the silhouette of a tall figure standing at a workbench, the glow of a welding torch illuminating a broad-shouldered frame. Drawing a slow breath, Jax sat up, forcing himself to remain calm. He glanced around until his gaze landed on a battered side table, holding a battered canteen of water. Parched, he fumbled for it and took a deep gulp, ignoring the stale metallic taste. A sudden voice, gruff and tinged with an alien accent, broke the workshop's hush. "You're awake." Startled, Jax peered at the figure. He took in the mechanical limbs strewn on a nearby shelf, the variety of tools pinned to the walls, the half-disassembled thruster lying on the floor. His rescuer stepped away from the bench, setting aside the torch. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, clad in a stained mechanic's jumpsuit with the sleeves torn at the shoulders, revealing arms covered in mottled gray scales. Her hands ended in short, blunt claws, and her face bearing a sharp snout and luminous amber eyes belonged to a species Jax had only read about in passing, a Kareth. If he was not mistaken, they were known for their mechanical aptitudes and formidable strength. She regarded him with an expression that bordered on annoyance, sharp teeth showing in a slight sneer. "You're messing up my cot," she said, voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Thanks for, saving me," Jax managed, clearing his throat. A grunt was her only immediate reply. She turned and rummaged through a tool chest. "You crashed in my yard," she said at last, her accent coloring each word. "I don't like ships lighting my junk on fire." "You have my apologies," Jax muttered, dryly, wincing as he swung his legs over the side of the cot. His head throbbed. "I'll get out of your hair as soon as I can." She eyed him from head to toe, possibly noting the variety of bruises and the blood crusted on his temple. Her muzzle curled as though tasting the air. "You look half dead," she growled. "Won't make it far." Jax exhaled wearily. "I'll manage," he said, though he was not at all certain. The memory of his crash of the final moment when the thrusters gave out lingered like a nightmare in his mind. "I just need a minute." Silence hovered. The overhead lamp flickered again. Finally, she jerked her head toward the far side of the workshop. "Your ship's thruster array is destroyed. The hull's bent in 3 places. The environmental stabilizers are junk. I pulled what I could salvage off the wreck." "You salvaged my ship?" he asked, a sudden pang of alarm coursing through him. She shrugged. "I'm a mechanic. Scraps are scraps, especially on Kareth." She set down a box of parts on a cluttered table. "But I didn't strip everything. Figured you might pay me for repairs." Jax managed a sardonic grin. "I'm not exactly flush with credits right now." A harsh chuckle rumbled from her throat. "Then you'll work it off, or do something else I need. Payment is a must. Human. I don't offer free services." especially not on Kareth. Jax took another long drink from the canteen, mind already racing. If the Imperium's bounty hunters were on his trail, every second counted. He needed a functional ship, or at least some means of leaving this forsaken moon. "All right," he said, half exhaling. "Let's talk details." She stared at him in silence, her amber gaze oddly piercing. Then, with a grunt, she turned on her heel and strode toward the workbench. "You're lucky you survived that crash," she said, voice echoing in the cramped workshop. "I'm Thira, by the way. Might as well know the name of the one who'll be fixing your worthless ship." Worthless ship, indeed, Jax thought sourly, though he felt a flicker of gratitude. "Jax Varin," he said, "just a pilot caught in a string of bad luck. Welcome to Kareth." "Jax Varin," Thira replied dryly, rummaging through a pile of twisted metal. "Bad luck is a currency here. You might be a wealthy man." A hollow feeling settled in his chest. No matter how sarcastic the alien mechanic sounded, she was right. Kareth was a place for the desperate, a lawless junkyard moon overshadowed by the might of the Imperium's distant presence. People with no other options came here, either to disappear or to eke out a living from the remains of countless wrecks. As the flicker of the torch played across Thira's scaled features, Jax wondered whether his improbable rescuer might be the key to escaping his pursuers or a threat in her own right. He had survived the crash, but there were many dangers yet to come. He did not have much choice. For now, Jax would bide his time, regain his strength, and see just how this alien mechanic would demand her payment. The unspoken tension between them hung in the oily air, a promise of strange alliances and unexpected debts. So he leaned back against the wall, closed his eyes, and allowed himself a few moments of uneasy rest. In the den of salvage, amidst the clang of tools and the hum of broken engines, his fate had become entwined with that of a gruff Kareth mechanic, one who had saved his life and would soon demand something more. "Get up!" Thira's gruff command jolted Jax from a restless doze. His eyes snapped open to find her looming over him. The workshop's harsh lighting made her scaled, features glint like worn steel. He sat up, ignoring the protest of bruised ribs. "I'm awake." She handed him a bowl of stew that smelled vaguely of roasted tubers. "You'll need strength if you plan to fix your ship," she muttered. Jax nodded his thanks, too hungry to protest, and began wolfing down the thick stew. It tasted better than he expected, even if it was gritty with hints of unknown spices. Thira watched him for a moment, then gestured for him to follow her. "Once you've eaten, we'll see the damage." He followed her out of the workshop into the dim light of Kareth's morning. The sky glowed with a dull, pale sun obscured by swirling dust storms. The landscape was every bit as bleak as Jax remembered. Twisted heaps of starship hulls, scorched engines, fractured plating stretching in all directions. They traversed winding paths of scrap, occasionally passing half-buried cannons and rusted cargo containers. Jax's mind whirled, half in awe at the sheer scale of the junkyard. It was as though centuries of galactic travel had vomited their refuse onto this moon. At last, they arrived at the remains of the Fortune's Echo. Thira had used a hover lift to drag the bulk of the ship closer to her workshop, leaving scorched grooves in the earth. The starboard side was torn open, revealing twisted wiring and shattered compartments. Jax felt a pang of sorrow, recalling the many voyages he and the vessel had shared. Now it lay like a carcass, helpless and gutted. "Your thruster assembly is gone," Thira said curtly, circling the husk. "Control systems might be salvageable, but half the panel is fried. The cooling rods are junk. The life support system is destroyed." Her tail, long and muscular, lashed behind her in agitation. "Can we fix it?" Jax asked, swallowing hard. She eyed him, I can fix anything, she said, voice low and confident. But it will cost time, effort, and parts, all of which require compensation. Jax met her gaze. I told you. I'm strapped for credits right now. But if we can get the ship flying, I can settle a job. Maybe find a haul to pay you back. A humorless snort. I have little interest in your promise of future payouts. I need a more immediate guarantee. Jax felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. If the ship was beyond simple patchwork, it would require major reconstruction. That meant a heavy cost. What do you propose? He asked quietly. Thira looked him over, crossing her arms. Her amber eyes shone with a calculating edge. I have other projects, other debts owed to me by less savory folk. I might need an extra pair of hands to collect. Or I may need you to pilot a run if I can't get a decent driver. Also, you have a certain face. If the Imperium is after you, perhaps you can be useful as bait. He stiffened, uncertain how to respond, but she waved a hand dismissively. Calm yourself. I'm not in the business of turning people into the Imperium. I'm in the business of survival. For that, you sometimes need leverage. Jax let out a breath, part relief, part resignation. All right, I'll do what you need. Just fix my ship enough to get off this moon. Once I'm free and clear, I promise to settle up. One way or another. Her muzzle twitched as though she found his words faintly amusing. We'll see, she said. Then, with a curt gesture, she handed him a dented toolbox and pointed to the Fortune's Echo. Let's see what you're made of. Pilot, time to get your hands dirty. And so they began. For the rest of that day, they toiled under the feeble sunlight, stripping damaged panels, rerouting burnt cables, trying to coax some life back into the battered frame. Jax marveled at Thira's skill. With her broad claws and specialized tools, she made quick work of the half-melted plating, extracting salvageable components. You handle that torch well, he said between heavy breaths, sweat trickling down the back of his neck. Thira gave a non-committal grunt. I've been doing this for years, she replied simply, prying open another section of hull. Sparks showered the ground as she cut through twisted metal, born to a mechanic clan on Kareth Prime. We had a saying, a broken machine is only an opportunity for rebirth. Jax nodded. A good philosophy, he offered. Better than your Imperium's a broken man is worthless trash, she retorted, though there was no apparent malice in her tone. Jax pressed his lips together. He was no fan of the Imperium either, but to see that raw resentment from an alien who had no reason to trust him was sobering. They worked until darkness began to creep across the sky, and the dust-laden wind grew cold, at last. Thira tossed her tools aside and rolled her shoulders. Enough for now, she said. We'll continue tomorrow. Jax glanced at the Fortune's Echo, only partially stripped and partially repaired. We made some progress, he allowed. Thira gave him a sidelong look. Don't get your hopes up, she warned. We have a long way to go, and I still haven't told you what I want in return. He nodded, swallowing his anxiety. The way she spoke made his pulse quicken. He wondered just how steep her price would be. Without another word, she turned and headed back toward the workshop, leaving Jax standing amid the rusted scrapyard. He gazed once more upon the shattered silhouette of his ship, caught between despair and the faint flicker of a second chance. In the gathering twilight, he followed the footsteps of the alien mechanic, uncertain whether his debt to her might become something that would consume him. But deep within, a stirring of cautious hope pulsed. At least she had not turned him over to the Syndicate or the Imperium. For now, that was enough. Night fell over Kareth, blanketing the scrapyard in shadows. The landscape lit only by feeble starlight and the faint glow of scattered neon signs from distant hovels. Thira's workshop was one of the sturdier structures in the area. Within its corrugated walls, the hum of a generator provided power for basic illumination, though the lights buzzed and flickered like a swarm of insects. Jax and Thira shared a brief meal of salted protein bars and stale bread, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, she pointed to a corner of the shop where a rickety cot had been set up. "You sleep there," she said, her tone indicating that conversation was over. Jax nodded silently and lay down, too exhausted to argue. His mind churned with worry about the bounty on his head. If he managed to repair the Fortune's echo, how would he avoid the Imperium's patrols? Not to mention the Syndicate's wrath. His muscles ached, and fatigue dragged at him. But just as he began to drift into slumber, he heard a faint, metallic rattle. He opened his eyes to see Thira standing at the workshop entrance, peering outside with an intense gaze. "What is it?" he whispered, sitting up. She made a low, hissing sound. "Lights," she muttered. "In the distance. Could be a patrol, or could be scavengers." Jax's pulse quickened. "Think they're after me." Thira shrugged, though her tail lashed from side to side. "They're always after someone on Kareth, but if it's bounty hunters, they might come sniffing around for easy prey." Jax slid off the cot, ignoring the groan of protest from his weary limbs. "What do we do?" She bared her teeth in a silent snarl. "We prepare," she said simply, and began rummaging through a crate. She produced a battered pulse rifle, setting it on a nearby table. Then she pulled out two smaller sidearms. Handing one to Jax, she said, "Hope you remember how to shoot." He ran a hand over the worn grip, testing its weight. It was not dissimilar to the weapons used by rogue freelancers on the frontier. "I can handle it," he murmured. Together, they slipped out the side door of the workshop into the cold night air. Thira's keen eyes scanned the horizon. Jax spotted flickering lights bobbing amid the mountainous heaps of scrap, perhaps half a kilometer away. The tension in the air was palpable. Jax steadied his breathing, forcing his heart not to race. His life had been one of close calls and narrow escapes. But standing with a Kareth mechanic in the dead of night, waiting for potential attackers, felt surreal. Minutes passed. The lights drew closer, weaving through the labyrinth of junk. At last, forms emerged from behind rusted hulks. Three shadowy figures wearing battered armor and face masks. They held rifles pointed outward, searching for something or someone. Thira motioned for Jax to keep low. She clicked a switch on her rifle, powering it up with a low hum. Jax peered around the edge of a half-collapsed container, waiting for the strangers to reveal their intentions. Voices echoed, muffled by distance. At first, Jax could not make out their words, but as they approached, the night air carried snatches of conversation. "Somewhere around here. Big crash. Must be valuable salvage." A second voice chimed in, gruffer than the first. "They say he's got a bounty. We bring him in. We get paid." Jax's heart sank. They were indeed looking for him. The third figure, shorter but stockier, chuckled. "Yeah, Imperium's offering a decent sum. Half dead is acceptable too. Let's comb the place." Thira's tail slithered behind her, betraying her agitation. She pressed her muzzle close to Jax's ear. "If they find you, they'll take you," she whispered. "I can drive them off, but we might need to be quick." Jax nodded. "Let's see if we can scare them away. No need for a firefight if we can help it." The three bounty hunters spread out among the scrap. Their flashlights stabbed beams of light through the darkness. "Hello," called the gruff one. "We're not looking for trouble. Just want the pilot." A cold knot of fear coiled in Jax's stomach. He glanced at Thira, who raised her rifle. With painstaking caution, they crept around the perimeter of her workshop, seeking higher ground behind a towering pile of broken engine cores. One of the hunters kicked aside metal scraps, scanning with a flashlight. Look at this. Tracks. Someone dragged the wrecked ship over here. Bet they're fixing it. The shorter one advanced, rifle aimed at the workshop door. Then, let's flush them out. Before they could move another step, Thira squeezed the trigger on her rifle. A brilliant arc of ionized energy zipped through the gloom, striking the ground at the hunter's feet. Sparks flew, and the bounty hunters scrambled for cover. "Back off!" Thira roared, her powerful voice echoing across the scrapyard. A moment of silence, punctuated only by the crackle of the fired shot. Then one of the hunters shouted, "We don't want you, alien. We just want the pilot who crashed here. Stand aside, and no one gets hurt." Thira's lips curled in disdain. "This is my property," she growled. "You have no business here. Leave now." Jax felt his nerves jangling. A direct confrontation could end badly. The hunters were more than likely well armed, and Thira's workshop offered limited defenses. But if they succeeded in scaring them off, perhaps the bounty hunters would assume Jax had fled. "We'll pay you," one of them called out. "A cut of the bounty." Thira spat on the ground. "Your credits are worthless to me. I make my own trade." The hunters conferred in hushed tones. Jax strained to hear, but their conversation was lost in the rustle of the wind. Finally, the short one shouted, "Fine. We'll smoke you out." He tossed something cylindrical toward the workshop. It clattered on the ground, rolling to a stop near the main door. A plume of noxious greenish gas erupted from the canister, spreading across the yard. Thira snarled. "Poison gas!" she snapped, fumbling in a side pouch. She pulled out 2 small respirators, shoving one into Jax's hands. They pressed the masks over their faces just as the gas began creeping closer. Jax coughed, eyes watering even with the filtration. The world took on an eerie haze. "We can't let them corner us," he said, voice muffled by the mask. She nodded, her eyes fierce. "Let's circle around and hit them from behind." Though Jax was no soldier, desperation and adrenaline guided him. While the hunters advanced toward the workshop, he and Thira moved in a wide arc, crouching behind junk heaps to avoid the swirling gas. Within moments, Jax spotted the 3 silhouettes, their flashlights slicing through the fumes. He squeezed the sidearm in his hand, feeling sweat bead on his brow. Thira signaled silently, 2 of her fingers extended, then pointed at the largest figure, probably the one who first spoke. Jax understood. Focus on taking them by surprise. He steadied his aim. The distance was maybe 15 yards, visibility hampered by swirling haze. With a silent prayer, he pulled the trigger. A bolt of sizzling energy caught the big hunter in the shoulder, spinning him around with a pained cry. Startled, the other 2 whipped around, returning fire. Ion beams slashed the air, striking the junk piles, sending showers of sparks dancing. Jax ducked behind a twisted hull segment, heart pounding. Thira returned fire with her rifle, pinning the hunters behind scattered debris. "We can't hold them here forever," she called, voice tense. "But if we take them out, or drive them away, we won't have to worry about them telling others you're here." A flash of movement, one hunter flanking from the side. Jax dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding a searing bolt that flew overhead. Singing his hair, he raised his weapon and fired, but the shot went wide. Thira shifted her position, bounding over scraps with uncanny agility. The second hunter turned his rifle to track her, but she was too swift. She launched herself forward, bringing the butt of her rifle crashing into his face mask. With a resounding crack, the man collapsed, groaning. The third hunter, the short one, swiveled to aim at Thira. Jax had a clean shot. He squeezed the trigger. The beam clipped the man's leg, forcing him down with a cry of pain. Breathing hard, Jax and Thira trained their weapons on the injured men, staying out of reach. Two were down, moaning in agony, while the big one clutched his wounded shoulder, leaning against a rusted chunk of hull. "You still want the pilot," Thira growled, muzzle twisted in a silent snarl. "Damn you," hissed the big hunter, spitting blood. "He's worth a lot of credits. Is that worth dying over?" Jax asked quietly, his voice shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. A tense silence fell. The short hunter coughed, eyeing Thira's rifle warily. At last, he muttered, "Fine, we'll back off." "You hear that, Quellis?" he spat, glancing at the big man. Quellis glared, then nodded grudgingly, wincing in pain. "You can't hide forever," he warned. "We'll spread word. You'll have more hunters knocking soon." "That's my problem," Thira said coolly. "Now get lost." With labored grunts, the three bounty hunters staggered away, disappearing into the swirling darkness. Jax kept his weapon raised until their lights vanished behind the labyrinth of scrap, and only then did he lower it, exhaling sharply. "Well," he said, voice trembling slightly, "so much for staying under the radar." Thira muttered a curse in her own language, then turned to Jax. "The price for fixing your ship just went up," she stated. "Now I have a target on my back, too." Guilt gnawed at him. "I'm sorry," he managed. She shrugged, tension evident in the set of her shoulders. "It's done. Now we need to be smarter. If more hunters come, we won't always get so lucky." They trudged back to the workshop, hearts still hammering. The faint starlight glimmered on twisted metal, as though mocking the violence that had just taken place. Jax wondered if this was only the beginning of worse confrontations to come. Yet despite the danger, he felt a spark of gratitude for Thira's unwavering stance at his side. She had risked her life to protect him, a stranger and a burden. Debt weighed on him now more than ever. In the shadowy confines of the workshop, Jax sank onto the cot, mind churning with thoughts of the near-fatal skirmish. Thira set her rifle aside, pacing restlessly. Neither spoke for a long time. At last, Jax whispered, "Thank you." She glanced at him with a measured look. "Don't thank me yet," she murmured. "We're a long way from safe." But in that uncertain night, Jax felt a flicker of warmth, an unspoken bond forged in fire, perhaps. He drifted into fitful sleep, hoping tomorrow would bring some plan of escape or a chance to regain his life. Outside, the scrapyard stood silent, the wreckage bearing silent witness to a new alliance that might shape both their fates. Morning on Kareth was heralded by a pallid, sickly light that barely penetrated the smog-laced sky. Jax woke with a stiffness in his limbs, the lingering echo of last night's firefight pulsing in his muscles. He rose from the cot to find Thira already awake, tinkering with what looked like a half-assembled starship part on her main workbench. She glanced over as he approached. "We need additional supplies," she said curtly. "I have a few thruster modules that might be adapted to your vessel, but we'll need better coolant lines and a new manifold. And then there's the navigation array to consider." Jax rubbed the back of his neck. "Any chance we can salvage those here?" he asked, gesturing to the endless sea of junk beyond the workshop walls. Thira's muzzle twitched. "There are places deeper in the scrapyard where bigger ship components can be found, but it's dangerous, full of raiders and scavengers who won't hesitate to kill outsiders. Still, it's cheaper than buying from the local black market." A humorless chuckle escaped Jax's lips. "I can't exactly pay black market rates, anyway. So the scrapyard it is." The Kareth mechanic nodded, standing up from her bench. "Then we go together," she said simply. "The best salvage is a few kilometers from here, across hostile territory." Jax gathered his nerve. After the events of the night before, The idea of venturing into an even more treacherous part of Kareth made his heart pound. But he needed those ship parts, needed a chance at freedom. "Let's do it," he said, voice taut with resolve. Thira rummaged through a storage locker, pulling out a large backpack. She stuffed it with tools, rations, and a few canisters of water. "We move fast. We stay low," she instructed. "If we encounter trouble, we handle it quickly." "Understood." Jax nodded. He belted on a holster containing the sidearm from the night before. Once the rifle was slung over Thira's back, they set out into the labyrinth of rust and ruin that was the Kareth scrapyard. They walked for some time, weaving between hulking starship hulls and precarious towers of scrap that reached toward the dull sky. The air tasted of decaying metal and old fuel. Occasionally, they spotted other denizens of the yard, gaunt figures picking through trash, armed with makeshift clubs or spears. Most gave them a wide berth. As they ventured deeper, the noise of the settlement behind them faded, replaced by an eerie hush. Jax found his senses sharpening, his gaze darting across the twisted shapes of old ships and broken vehicles. Thira's reptilian eyes scanned every shadow, her posture tense. "We're close," she said softly. "There's a hull graveyard ahead, a few older vessels from the old Draken War. The coolant systems in those ships might be salvaged." They rounded a mountainous stack of corroded plating and came upon a clearing of sorts, a massive crater filled with the skeletal remains of warships from a long-forgotten battle. The sight was both haunting and awe-inspiring. Twisted girders, collapsed decks, the silent, rusted forms of once mighty craft. "Stay alert," Thira hissed. They descended into the crater, stepping over cables and shattered panels. Jax felt a chill as they passed a towering section of hull, scorched and pockmarked by plasma fire. He could almost imagine the echoes of the battle that had once raged here, eons ago. "Over there," Thira said, pointing to a partially intact corridor jutting from the ground. "We might find a suitable manifold inside." With careful steps, they entered the broken passage. The floor tilted at a sharp angle. Broken wires dangled from the ceiling, occasionally sparking with residual energy. Dust motes swirled in the stale air. Thira set down her pack and pulled out a heavy cutting tool. "Help me pry open this panel," she instructed, indicating a sealed hatch that might lead to the ship's lower systems. Jax braced himself against the metal, pushing with all his might. The hatch groaned in protest, but refused to budge. Thira jammed the cutting tool into the narrow gap and pressed a switch, sending sparks flying. Gradually, the hatch gave way, sliding open to reveal a dark compartment. She passed a flashlight to Jax. "Check for any hazards. I'll hold the hatch." He shone the beam inside, revealing a cramped space filled with twisted pipes and half-melted conduits. A thick layer of dust coated everything, but the manifold assembly was visible, if mostly buried under debris. "I see it," Jax said. "We'll need to clear some wreckage." Working side by side, they pulled away broken panels, unspooling thick cables that had fused together. An occasional clang echoed ominously through the corridor, as if the ship's ghostly remains objected to their trespass. At last, Thira managed to free a large chunk of metal from the manifold system. She growled in frustration. "It's damaged," she muttered. "But maybe I can patch it. We need the main coolant lines, too." Jax rummaged around, shining the flashlight into crevices. "I see something down here," he crouched, reaching for a coiled length of tubing. With a firm yank, he dislodged it from the wreckage, wiping off decades of accumulated grime. "Might this do?" Thira examined it, running a claw across the flexible metal. "It's in better shape than I expected. Keep it." They spent another half-hour scavenging smaller components, occasionally pausing to listen for any signs of other scavengers. Finally, burdened with salvaged parts. They carefully made their way back up the tilted corridor. Emerging into the crater, Thira shielded her eyes from the wan sunlight. "We should leave before raiders show up," she said, glancing around warily. But no sooner had they begun climbing out of the crater than a shout rang out from behind a wall of debris. "Oi! Hands where we can see them!" Jax froze, heart thumping. A trio of ragged figures stepped into view, each holding crude rifles. Their clothes were patchwork, faces partially hidden by scavenged breathing masks. Thira snarled softly, shifting her weight. Raiders. One of the bandits, a tall, wiry woman with a scar across one cheek, barked. "What are you doing on our turf? This salvage belongs to the Bloodfleck gang. We didn't see your name on it," Jax muttered, raising his hand slightly. The second raider, a hulking man with a face tattoo, spat on the ground. "Smart mouth. Drop the packs if you don't want your heads ventilated." A cold sweat broke out on Jax's forehead. He glanced at Thira, who remained tense, her clawed fingers twitching near her belt. "That's a lot of valuable salvage," hissed the third raider, stepping closer. "Looks like some top-shelf coolant lines. Must have come from a Draken war vessel." "Yeah." Thira's golden eyes flicked from one raider to the next. "We found it," she said, voice low. "It's ours." The wiry woman barked a laugh. "Not anymore. Drop it, or we drop you." Something in Thira's posture changed. Jax could almost feel the rage coursing through her. The Kareth did not scare easily, but these raiders were armed, and they had the high ground. With a resigned sigh, Jax began to lower his pack to the ground. "All right, let's not do anything rash," he murmured. Thira, however, did not seem ready to comply. She shifted her weight, glancing sidelong at Jax. He recognized that look. She was about to do something dangerous. In a blur of motion, she lunged to the side, drawing the pulse rifle from her back with startling speed. The raiders cursed, stumbling to bring their weapons to bear. But Thira was already firing, sending an ion bolt that slammed into the hulking man's rifle. Knocking it from his grip, Jax dove behind a slab of broken hull, adrenaline surging. Shots rang out, beams sizzling through the air. He pressed himself flat, waiting for an opening. Thira rolled behind another chunk of debris, returning fire with fierce precision. A shriek of pain indicated she'd hit one of the raiders. Cautiously, Jax peeked out, sidearm ready. The wiry woman spotted him and snapped off a shot. He ducked, the bolt scorching the edge of the metal slab. He returned fire. His aim was shaky, but luck was on his side. The shot struck the woman's mask, sending her reeling. She collapsed with a strangled cry, smoke rising from the destroyed filter. The hulking man, now unarmed, scrambled behind a rusted section of fuselage, panting heavily. "Enough!" he shouted, voice trembling. "Enough! Please! Don't kill me!" Thira, breathing hard, crept around the debris, rifle at the ready. Jax joined her, heart pounding. The man cowered, hands raised, eyes wide with terror. She pointed her rifle at his chest. "Walk away," she growled, "and tell your gang that Thira's territory is off limits." He nodded frantically, stumbling to his feet. Blood dripped from a gash on his arm. We didn't know," he stammered. "I'll spread the word." With that, he limped off into the scrapyard, leaving his fallen comrades behind. Thira and Jax exchanged a look, then hurried to gather their precious salvage. The wiry woman was dead, the other raider unconscious. They left them where they lay, grimly aware that mercy had no place in Kareth's lawless expanse. They picked their way out of the crater, each lost in thought, another brush with violence, another reminder that survival here demanded constant vigilance. Jax was no stranger to danger, but with each confrontation, he felt the invisible clock ticking against him. At length, they reached a winding path leading back toward the workshop. Thira carried the heavier salvaged parts with ease, while Jax clutched the coolant lines to his chest, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. Only when the workshop's corrugated walls came into sight did Jax allow himself a breath of relief. Thira paused at the entrance, scanning for any sign of further threats. Finding none, she led the way inside, locking the door behind them. That was too close, Jax said quietly, setting the parts on a rickety table. Thira nodded, peeling off her gloves to reveal scaled hands slick with sweat. "We got what we needed," she said, her voice tight with fatigue. "Now we can see if we can piece your ship together." Jax could only nod. The day's events had left him both exhausted and oddly exhilarated. He was alive. He had the parts that might put him on a path off-world. And throughout it all, Thira had proven herself a formidable ally. His debt to her now seemed heavier than ever. But for reasons beyond mere credits or salvage, there was a growing respect between them, forged in the scrapyard's crucible. He saw a reflection of his own desperation in her fierce determination to protect what was hers. Tomorrow, they would begin the painstaking process of installing the newly scavenged components. For tonight, Jax collapsed onto his cot, arms aching, mind swimming with images of rusted hulks and lethal raiders. Yet beneath the weariness, a spark of hope glowed. Maybe, just maybe, he would escape Kareth and pay back the alien mechanic who had saved him. Days blurred together in a flurry of repairs. Thira proved a relentless taskmaster, driving Jax to work from dawn to dusk. Under her tutelage, he learned to weld fractured hull sections, reroute power relays, and calibrate archaic thruster designs. Every step was fraught with challenges. Yet each victory, however small, kindled a sense of accomplishment. Each evening, they shared a meager meal and cleaned their tools in companionable silence. Outside, the scrapyard glowed with the faint luminescence of dust storms swirling beneath Kareth's star. Bounty hunters sometimes prowled the distance, but none ventured too close to Thira's fortified domain. It was a week after their salvage run when Jax found himself elbow-deep in the Fortune's Echo's engine compartment, tightening the newly installed coolant lines. Thira stood behind him, arms folded, eyes narrowed in critical assessment. "You missed a seal," she said, pointing with a claw. Jax grimaced, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sorry, let me fix that." He fished out a specialized fastener and locked the seal into place. Thira nodded, lips quirking in a faint hint of satisfaction. "Better," she rumbled. They stepped back, surveying the partial restoration of the battered vessel. From the outside, the ship still looked like a wounded beast, its hull scorched and bent, but the vital systems were slowly coming online. With a sigh, Jax turned to Thira. "We've done a lot," he said softly, "but there's still so much to fix before it can fly. The nav array, the sublight thrusters, the life support." She shrugged. "All in due time. With these new parts, you might achieve a basic liftoff in a few more days." A wave of relief mingled with anxiety washed over him. "I can't thank you enough," he began, only for Thira to cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I don't do this for thanks," she said brusquely. "I do it for payment." Jax hesitated. He'd known the question of his debt would arise sooner or later. She had rescued him, offered her workshop and expertise, fought off bounty hunters, and helped him scavenge vital parts. He owed her a massive favor, if not multiple. "What's your price?" he asked quietly. Thira studied him, her golden eyes unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, and the silence pressed in. Then, She inclined her head toward a cluster of crates in the corner of the workshop. I have a job, she said at last. One that requires a pilot. Someone who can handle themselves in dangerous situations. Her voice took on a guarded tone, as though reluctant to disclose too much. There's a shipment of advanced engine prototypes hidden on the far side of Kareth. I made a deal to transport them off-world. The buyer is paying handsomely. If I can deliver those prototypes, I'll have enough credits and resources to keep this place running for years. Jax frowned. And you want me to pilot the transport? I take it. She nodded. My own vessel is too broken down for the job. If we can get your ship functional, we can load the prototypes aboard and slip out of Kareth quietly. Then we meet the buyer at a rendezvous point in neutral space. You get your freedom. I get my credits. He mulled it over, the gears turning in his mind. What about the Imperium and the bounty? Won't that make me a liability? Thira snorted softly. The buyer doesn't care about Imperium bounties. He deals in the shadows, far from prying eyes. And if you perform well, you'll earn enough to pay off your debts, maybe even bribe your way out of that bounty. A swirl of conflicting thoughts coursed through Jax's head. Smuggling advanced engine prototypes was risky, but no more so than anything else he'd attempted lately. When do you want to go? He asked at last. As soon as the Fortune's Echo can safely fly. Thira's gaze lingered on him. This is a big job, pilot. Failure means we both lose everything. He met her stare. I understand, he said. I'll do it. She exhaled, a hint of relief hidden behind her stoic facade. Good, she said. We'll finalize the details once the ship's operational. You'll get a share of the profits, enough to settle any outstanding issues. Jax extended a hand. Deal, he said simply. Thira looked at his outstretched hand, then clasped it with her own large, scaled claw. Her grip was firm, almost crushing. Yet there was a certain gentleness, too. Deal, she echoed. And so the bargain was sealed. Jax Varin would serve as pilot for the alien mechanics' illicit transport, using the repaired Fortune's Echo to deliver contraband engines to an off-world buyer. In return, Thira would wipe his debt clean and possibly give him the means to escape the bounty that dogged his heels. That night, as he sat by the flickering work lamp, Jax found his thoughts drifting. The days of labor alongside Thira had forged a strange camaraderie. He admired her skill and grit, her willingness to face danger head-on. There was something more, though, something unspoken in the quiet moments, like an ember of connection he could not name. Yet he reminded himself of the reality. Thira was an alien mechanic, a tough, no-nonsense survivor in a lawless world. She demanded payment for everything, including her loyalty. Jax was simply another piece in her grand puzzle, a means to an end. Or so he told himself. The night stretched on, and Jax eventually found restless sleep. Outside, the scrapyard was still and silent. The twisted remains of countless ships, illuminated by a cold moonlight. Somewhere in that dark expanse lay more dangers, more hunters. But for now, he had a purpose, a mission that might free him from his past. And by Thira's side, he felt a measure of stability he hadn't known in years. Chapter 7, Signs of Betrayal. Despite their mutual agreement, the atmosphere around the workshop seemed to shift in the following days. Jax couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching him from the darkness of the scrapyard. Thira, too, grew more distant, her manner curt. She spent long hours locked away in the side room, poring over star charts and scribbling notes in an alien language. One morning, as Jax busied himself checking the Fortune's Echo's sublight thrusters, he heard the low rumble of an engine outside. Heart pounding, he grabbed his sidearm and peered cautiously through a crack in the workshop door. A small hover truck had pulled up, its engine sputtering. Two figures emerged, one a humanoid female dressed in dusty leathers, the other a lanky alien with elongated limbs and a crest of spines running down his back. Their eyes darted nervously across the yard. Thira stepped out to meet them, arms folded. Jax couldn't make out every word, but snippets of conversation drifted his way. "You're late," Thira snapped. "Hard to avoid patrols," whined the spined alien. "We brought a partial down payment." Thira's low growl. "Not good enough. You said all or nothing." A tense exchange followed. At one point, Thira gestured angrily at the horizon. The female visitor shook her head. Eventually, they piled back into the hover truck and sped away, leaving Thira glowering after them. Jax emerged cautiously. "Buyers," he guessed. She shook her head. "Middlemen," she muttered. "They're short on funds. Claim the buyer will bring the rest at the rendezvous." He felt a prickle of unease. "Does that complicate our deal?" She snorted. "As long as we get paid eventually, it'll be fine. But I hate dealing with second-rate go-betweens." Something in her tone struck him. "You trust them?" Her muzzle curled in distaste. "I trust that they want a profit," she said. "But that's all. The rest is up to us," he sighed, returning to the thrusters. The sooner they got the ship operational, the sooner they could take control of their destiny, rather than waiting for shady intermediaries. But a seed of doubt was planted. Who was this mysterious buyer? Were they double-crossing Thira? Could this entire arrangement be a trap for Jax, or a means to turn him in for a larger bounty? He tried to banish the thought. Thira had already proven she wasn't one to betray him to the Imperium. But trust was a fragile commodity in the lawless realms. The following night, unable to sleep, Jax wandered outside the workshop, letting the cool breeze wash over him. He gazed up at Kareth's pale moon, recalling the countless star systems he'd visited before trouble ever found him. If only he could outrun his past. His reverie was broken by a sudden voice. "Can't sleep." He turned to see Thira leaning against a rusted crate, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the half-repaired ship. "Yeah," he murmured. "Got a lot on my mind." She exhaled slowly. "Me too." An unspoken tension hung between them, the weight of secrets and half-shared truths. Jax decided to address it. "Thira, if something goes wrong with this job, if the buyer tries to cheat us, they won't," she said, though her tone was less certain than her words. He studied her profile, the strong line of her jaw, the faint glint of scales in the moonlight. "Why do you trust them so much?" Her tail flicked restlessly. "Because if they cheat me, I will tear them apart," she said simply. "I've spent half my life building a reputation as someone you don't cross." A dry smile tugged at his lips. "Sounds like a good deterrent." They stood side by side in the silence, the workshop lights casting long shadows across the scrap-strewn ground. Finally, Thira spoke, again softer this time. "I know you're worried about your bounty," she said. "I've seen the way you keep glancing at the horizon, expecting more hunters." He shrugged. "Hard to relax when half the galaxy wants your head." She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting something other than her usual stoicism. "Once we finish this job, you'll have the means to start fresh. Buy forged documents, maybe, or settle old debts so the syndicate calls off their dogs." Jax swallowed, hope and doubt warring within him. "That's the plan," he whispered. A moment passed, pregnant with possibilities neither dared name. Then Thira nodded, pushing off the crate. "Get some rest," she said, turning away. "We have more work tomorrow." He watched her go, a swirl of conflicting emotions churning in his chest. Thira was no ordinary mechanic. She was a force of will, a pillar of silent strength in this chaotic world. And though she demanded payment for all her services, Jax sensed something deeper at play, a guarded heart that had learned to survive by never showing weakness. He returned to the workshop, where the battered hull of the Fortune's Echo loomed in the flickering lamplight. Tomorrow, more repairs. Tomorrow, more steps toward a precarious freedom. Still, the nagging question lingered. Would Thira remain true once the chips were down, or was betrayal looming on the horizon like a storm cloud? Days later, the Fortune's Echo stood on shaky legs of possibility. The thrusters, though still scarred, hummed with cautious energy. The patched hull gleamed in places where new plates had replaced old wounds. Thira's modifications to the manifold and coolant system whirred smoothly. For the first time since the crash, Jax felt a surge of optimism that the ship might indeed fly. "Fire it up," Thira ordered, stepping clear of the engine thrusters. Jax swallowed, sliding into the pilot's seat, battered though it was. The cockpit console, a mishmash of old wiring and newly installed panels, flickered to life under his fingers. He performed a rapid check of the readouts, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "All systems nominal," he reported, voice tight with anticipation. "Let's see if the old girl still remembers how to hover." He engaged the stabilizers. The deck rumbled, the engines rising in a crescendo of mechanical growls. Dust rose in swirling eddies beneath the vessel. Inch by inch, the Fortune's Echo lifted off the ground, hovering a few meters above the scrapyard floor. Jax felt a grin stretch across his face. Thira watched from outside, arms crossed, tail swaying slightly with what might have been approval. After a minute of steady flight, Jax gently eased the craft back down, the landing struts settling with a soft crunch of gravel. Exhilarated, he shut down the engines and stepped out onto the ramp. "Not perfect," he said, "but it'll do." The Kareth mechanic nodded. "We'll need a proper test flight, but at least it hovers. Next step is finalizing the nav array and life support. Then we're ready for the job." Jax studied her, noticing the tension in her jaw. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded once, curtly. "I'm fine," she said, though her eyes flickered with a hint of worry. "We're running out of time. The middlemen want us to depart in 2 days. The buyer is pushing for a swift delivery." A cold knot of apprehension settled in Jax's stomach. 2 days was hardly enough time to ensure the ship was truly spaceworthy. But that was the nature of illicit deals. Timing was everything. They spent the rest of the day installing the last of the life support systems. Thira worked tirelessly, splicing wires and calibrating oxygen filters with expert precision. Jax assisted, passing tools, locking down panels, double-checking the readouts on the newly scavenged components. As dusk approached, they gathered in the workshop for a final review. Jax wiped sweat from his brow, scanning the readouts on a handheld device. "OP2 levels are stable," he reported. "Pressure sealed. The nav array is basic, but it should get us where we need to go if we chart the coordinates properly." Thira nodded, brow furrowed. "We'll run a short test flight tomorrow, just around the moon, to confirm everything is operational. Then we load the shipment." She paused, tail curling behind her. "One more thing," she said, sounding oddly hesitant. "What is it?" Thira exhaled, her shoulders tensing. "I received a message from an old contact," she admitted. "It seems the Syndicate is offering a bonus for your capture, even out here on Kareth, if word gets out that you're still alive and about to take off." Jax felt his heart thump painfully in his chest. "Then more hunters will come," she nodded grimly. "We have to be prepared. Once we depart, we can't afford any last-minute ambush." He swallowed. "I understand. That night." Jax's dreams were plagued with memories of Kesper Station. where it all began. He recalled the slip of his hand that let the cargo get stolen, the sabotage that turned a simple job into a fiasco. The Imperium had pinned the blame on him, and the syndicate demanded repayment. The fear of capture or worse haunted him. When he awoke, drenched in sweat, Thira was already up, fine-tuning the thrusters. The day of the test flight had arrived, and tension hung thick in the air. They worked in silence, each lost in private anxieties. At last, the ship was deemed ready for a short hop around Kareth's upper atmosphere. Jax and Thira boarded, the cargo bay echoing with emptiness that would soon be filled with contraband. Thira strapped herself into the co-pilot seat. Though the controls there were rudimentary, "Let's see if this thing can break orbit," she said, voice tight. Jax powered up the engines, hands dancing over the console with practiced grace. Despite the battered state of the vessel, the systems responded to his touch. The Fortune's echo rose steadily, dust swirling beneath it. He angled the nose skyward, boosting power to the thrusters. Outside the viewport, the scrapyard fell away, revealing the expanse of rusted wreckage stretching to the horizon. Kareth's dusty atmosphere glowed orange in the midday light, and the battered moon's rocky terrain soon lay far below. "We have altitude," Jax reported, trying to keep the excitement from his voice. Stabilizing attitude control, adjusting thruster output. Thira's clawed fingers tapped a readout. Hull integrity holds. No sign of pressure loss. Good. They hovered at the edge of the atmosphere, the blackness of space beckoning beyond. Jax performed a slow arc, letting the sensors calibrate. For a moment, all was still, save for the hum of the engines and the faint beep of instrumentation. "How does it feel?" Thira asked softly. Jax allowed himself a small grin. "Better than I expected. She handles a bit heavy, but the new manifold is working wonders. We might actually pull this off." She let out a low breath, shoulders relaxing slightly. "All right," she said. "Let's bring her back down. We don't want to draw unwanted attention." He guided the ship gently back into Kareth's skies, maneuvering around rocky spires and drifting clouds of dust. The landing was smooth, the struts sinking into the dirt near Thira's workshop with a subdued hiss. As they powered down, Thira turned to him. "We'll load the shipment tomorrow night," she said. "Then we depart first light." "Agreed." He nodded. "Agreed." They disembarked, stepping onto the rocky ground with renewed confidence. For the first time since his crash, Jax felt the real possibility of escape. 2 more days, and he might finally slip the noose of his bounty. Yet as they returned to the workshop, a new worry gnawed at him. He thought of the mysterious buyer, the questionable middleman, and the looming threat of a syndicate ambush. Their success hinged on everything going smoothly. Kareth, however, was a place where nothing ever went smoothly. That evening, Jax found Thira outside, perched on a stack of crates, staring at the setting sun. The swirl of dust made the horizon shimmer in dull oranges and reds. Shadows stretched across the scrapyard, and the air felt strangely still. He hesitated before approaching, uncertain if she desired company. But eventually, he climbed up and settled beside her. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the twilight colors bleed into the darkening sky. "You ever think about leaving this place for good?" Jax asked quietly. Thira flicked her gaze to him. "You mean Kareth?" He nodded. "The scrapyard, the outlaws, the constant violence. You're skilled enough to set up shop anywhere in the galaxy. Why stay here?" She exhaled softly. "I once tried," she murmured, her voice carrying a hint of a distant memory. "Years ago, I left with a cargo hauler crew, worked my way across a few star systems, but I found the same rot everywhere: corruption, exploitation, prejudice." She bared her teeth in a faint snarl. So I came back here, where at least I make my own rules. Jax looked down at his hands. I get that, he said. Sometimes it feels like no matter where I go, I'm haunted by my mistakes. She turned to him, amber eyes reflecting the dying light. And what mistakes are those? He hesitated, feeling vulnerability tug at him. Yet something about her presence, about the bond they'd forged through adversity, compelled him to speak. I never meant to steal that cargo, he admitted softly. It was supposed to be a legitimate job, just transporting goods. But someone sabotaged the ship, and the cargo got snatched by pirates. The Imperium pinned it on me, claimed I was an accomplice. The syndicate lost money on the deal, so they demanded I repay them in blood. Thira listened in silence, her expression unreadable. He sighed. I tried to run, tried to clear my name, but the bounties kept piling up, and eventually, no port would take me in. So I found myself here, a fugitive. If it weren't for you, I'd be dead in that wreck. She regarded him with a thoughtful look. No offense, but you humans can be quite naive, she said at last. Trusting the wrong people, believing the galaxy cares about fairness. He let out a bitter chuckle. No offense taken. You're right. I trusted the wrong crew. Now I'm paying the price. They lapsed into silence again, the wind gently lifting dust across the yard. Jax found himself gazing at Thira's profile, the sharp angles of her snout, the way her scales caught the sunset's glow. Something stirred in his chest, a cautious warmth that defied logic. Thank you, he said, his voice almost lost in the wind. She tilted her head. For what? For saving me. For giving me a chance to fix my ship, to leave this place. For trusting me enough to do this job. Even if you did it because you need a pilot. Thira shrugged, but there was no denying the hint of softness in her eyes. You're not so bad, for a naive human, she said, her tone teasing. Then she drew a breath, as if bracing herself. And maybe. I'm grateful to have someone around here I can rely on, even if it's temporary. This moon can be lonely. The admission took Jax by surprise. He felt a flutter in his chest, an unexpected surge of empathy and affection for the gruff alien mechanic. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her scaled forearm, wondering if she would reject the gesture. But Thira didn't pull away. She let his hand rest there, her gaze flickering between his face and the horizon. The air seemed to hum with unspoken emotion, something raw and fragile. I'm leaving soon, he murmured, the words heavy with regret. Once this job is done, we go our separate ways. She was silent for a long beat. Then she spoke, her voice quiet. That depends on many factors if the job goes well, if the buyer pays, if you still want to run from everything. Kareth might be a dumping ground, but it's my home. He swallowed hard. I guess we'll figure that out. Night fully claimed the sky, stars emerging faintly through the dust-laden atmosphere. At last, Thira pulled her arm away, clearing her throat. We should rest, she said, her usual briskness returning. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Jax nodded, sliding down from the crate. Together, they walked back to the workshop, side by side, though keeping a careful distance. The fleeting closeness they had shared hovered in the air, neither acknowledging it further. In the confines of the workshop, Thira locked the door and began shutting down the lights. Jax paused near his cot, heart pounding, wanting to say something more but unsure what words could possibly fit. Good night, he managed at last. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. Good night, Jax Varin. And so they parted, each retreating into separate corners of the workshop as Jax settled onto the creaking cot. He stared at the dark ceiling, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions, fear for the upcoming mission, hope for a future free of bounties, and a strange longing for the alien mechanic who had saved him. Sleep claimed him in fitful waves, dreams filled with half-formed images of flight and danger, of two figures standing against a galaxy that wanted them broken. In that swirling tapestry of subconscious visions, Thira's voice echoed, calling him onward to a destiny neither of them could yet comprehend. At dawn, Thira's contacts arrived with a battered cargo hauler, carrying sealed crates that purportedly held the prototype engines. Jax noticed their jumpy demeanor, the way they clutched their weapons nervously. He wondered if they feared syndicate interference, or if they might betray Thira at the last moment. But no betrayal came, at least not yet. Instead, they helped hoist the crates into the Fortune's Echo's cargo hold. Each crate was stamped with odd markings Jax didn't recognize, and the compartments hummed faintly, as though energy coursed within. "Be careful with those." The female contact snapped at a laborer who nearly dropped a crate. "They're worth more than your life." Thira stood by, arms folded, watching every movement. Jax stayed near the ramp, sidearm at his hip, ready to defend their precious cargo if necessary. The air crackled with tension. Once the crates were secured, the middlemen departed as quickly as they had come, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Thira motioned to Jax. "We'll secure these crates so they don't shift during flight. Then we leave immediately." He nodded, and together they spent the next hour strapping down the shipment, checking seals, running final diagnostics on the ship's systems. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the junkyard. Finally, with the cargo stowed and the engines warmed, Jax and Thira boarded the ship. Thira took the co-pilot seat, though she was more interested in monitoring cargo hold readouts than assisting with navigation. "Let's do this," Jax murmured, heart pounding. He powered up the Fortune's Echo, feeling the familiar vibration through the deck plating. With a deep breath, he lifted off, guiding the ship away from Thira's workshop. A pang of bittersweet realization struck him he might never see this place again, the old rusted shelter that had saved his life. They soared over the scrap-ridden plains, the lumps of twisted metal dwindling below. Kareth's horizon curved around them, dust storms swirling in the distance. Jax engaged the thrusters, pushing for orbit. Thira scanned the sensors. "No sign of pursuit yet," she reported. "Let's hope it stays that way," Jax said, exhaling. Coordinates set for the jump point. She tapped the console. "Yes, we'll make a short FTL hop to the rendezvous. About 3 systems over." The ship rattled as it cleared the moon's gravity well, the engines straining to maintain stable ascent. Jax grit his teeth, coaxing them to function. At last, the blackness of space unfolded around them, stars glinting like shards of ice. He set course for the jump point. "We're clear," he said, voice taut, transitioning to faster than light in 5. Thira gripped the co-pilot's chair. "Do it." Jax initiated the sequence. A whine filled the ship, building to a crescendo. The stars beyond the viewport stretched into white lines, and with a jolt that shuddered through the hull, they leapt into FTL. For a moment, all was calm. The FTL corridor glowed with shifting prismatic colors, and the ship's sensors hummed quietly. Jax let out a long breath, relief flooding him. They had escaped Kareth, at least for now. Thira unbuckled her harness, standing to check the cargo readings. "Everything stable?" Jax asked. She nodded. "Pressure's good. The prototypes are contained. If they're half as valuable as promised, we're about to become very wealthy." He turned in his chair, a small grin tugging at his lips. "Wealthy enough to settle my bounty. Maybe bribe an Imperium official. Possibly," she said, her tone guarded. Then, more quietly, she added, Wealthy enough for me to buy freedom from this life, too. Her words stirred something in him. Freedom. The promise of a new beginning. Unburdened by the sins of the past. Could they really grasp it? They floated in the FTL corridor for hours, each lost in thought. Occasionally, Thira would pace the ship's interior, checking the cargo straps and scanning the readings. Jax performed a few routine systems checks. The hum of the engines, a steady lull in the background. As the time approached to exit FTL, Jax rechecked the nav data. "We're coming up on the rendezvous system," he announced. Slowing to sublight, Thira returned to the co-pilot seat, strapping in. The Fortune's Echo shuddered again as it dropped from FTL, the swirling colors snapping back to pinpoint stars. Ahead lay a dim star, circled by a handful of rocky planets. Sensor pings indicated minimal traffic, a perfect location for clandestine dealings. Jax adjusted their course to the coordinates Thira provided. "Should we hail the buyer?" "Not yet," she replied, scanning the console. "He'll ping us when we're close enough. Stay sharp for any sign of trouble." The ship coasted deeper into the system, gliding past a barren planetoid pocked with craters. Suddenly, a light on the console blinked. An incoming transmission. Thira pressed a button. "Yes." A distorted voice crackled through. "Freight inbound. Send identification code." She typed a sequence of numbers into the console. A pause. Then the voice said, "Proceed to these coordinates. No funny business, or you won't live to regret it." Thira growled under her breath, but complied. Jax steered the ship toward a small asteroid field, one that could easily hide multiple vessels. Sure enough, as they approached, sensor readings detected a medium-sized freighter lurking in the rocks. Its silhouette was blocky, bristling with sensor arrays. Jax's nerves jangled. He slowed the Fortune's Echo, eyeing the battered hull of the other ship warily. A docking bay opened, ringed with external lights. The distorted voice crackled again. "Enter and land. Our men will offload the cargo." Jax glanced at Thira. She nodded, jaw set. With careful maneuvers, Jax guided the Fortune's Echo into the freighter's bay. Magnetic clamps engaged as the doors sealed behind them, the pressurized environment stabilizing. With a hiss, the docking bay airlock opened. A group of armed figures entered, weapons at the ready. One stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal a reptilian face with stark black eyes. Thira descended the ramp, Jax at her side. She crossed her arms. "We have your shipment," she said flatly. The reptilian buyer hissed softly, eyeing the crates. "So it seems." He snapped his claws, and his men moved to inspect the cargo. Tension crackled in the air. Jax kept his hand near his sidearm, scanning the surrounding bay for threats. This was the critical moment where betrayal could mean their deaths. At length, the buyer nodded. "The prototypes are intact. You have done well." Thira's tail flicked. "Then pay us." A slow smile creased the alien's face. He motioned to one of his underlings, who produced a small metal case. Opening it, he revealed rows of credit chips, each glowing with stored currency. Thira's eyes narrowed, scanning the chips with a handheld reader. She nodded once. "Payment confirmed," she said, exhaling. Relief soared through Jax. They had done it, they had delivered the goods without a hitch. Now, with the credits, he could pay off or bribe away his bounty. A new life beckoned, free of the syndicate's noose. The buyer turned to Thira, his expression unreadable. "Our transaction is complete," he said smoothly. "But I have one more offer, if you're interested." Thira tensed. "What sort of offer?" The reptilian buyer's black eyes glittered. "We have a client in need of a skilled mechanic to maintain certain high-end projects. It's lucrative, though it requires absolute discretion. Silence. Jax felt his stomach twist. Could Thira be tempted? She inhaled, her muzzle set in a firm line. No, she said. I don't plan on leaving my shop. This was a one-time run. A faint flicker of disappointment crossed the buyer's face. Very well, he murmured. Then you are free to go. He turned away, barking orders to his men to secure the prototypes. Thira, still wary, backed up the ramp. Jax followed, heart hammering. They entered the cockpit, sealing the hatch behind them. Within minutes, the Fortune's Echo was cleared to depart. Jax guided the ship out of the docking bay, tension only easing once they were back in open space. As the asteroid field receded, Thira slumped into her seat. It's done, she whispered, almost in disbelief. We have the credits. Jax let out a soft laugh, unable to contain the elation spreading through him. We did it, he said, meeting her gaze. For a moment, the weight of their shared struggle lifted. But the galaxy was vast, and their problems might not be so easily discarded. They had the means now, but what would they do with it? Where would they go? For now, at least, they had won a hard-fought victory, together. An hour later, the Fortune's Echo cruised through open space, heading to a neutral station, where Thira planned to exchange some of the credit chips for more liquid currency. Jax sat back in the pilot's seat, a small smile lingering on his lips. You look pleased, Thira noted from the co-pilot station, a hint of amusement softening her usual gruffness. He shrugged. Hard not to be. We pulled off a job that should solve most of our problems, at least financially. She inclined her head, rummaging through the case of credit chips. Enough to pay off a good chunk of your bounty. Maybe buy you a new identity if that's what you want. And for you, he asked, glancing over. Her gaze flicked to the viewport. I might invest in new equipment for my shop, upgrade security, perhaps buy a small second vessel for specialized salvage runs. Jax smiled faintly. Sounds like a good plan. They fell into a comfortable silence. But fate had other ideas. Without warning, the ship's sensors started beeping frantically. Jax snapped upright, eyes locking on the console. Multiple ships incoming, he said, voice tight, dropping out of FTL bearing right on us. Thira cursed. Pirates. Jax adjusted the scanners, his face draining of color. No, they're marked as Imperium vessels. Her claws dug into the armrests. They must have tracked you somehow. A hail came through, the Imperium insignia flickering on the comm display. Jax hesitated only a moment before answering, trying to mask the shaking in his voice. This is Imperium Patrol Vessel Strident Vow to unidentified craft. A crisp voice announced, You are ordered to power down and prepare for boarding. We have reason to believe you are harboring a fugitive. Jax exchanged a tense look with Thira. They know, he whispered, her jaw set. We're not letting them board. They'll take you and probably seize the ship too, he nodded. Adrenaline flooding his system. We need to run. The Imperium ships closed in, forming a blockade. Jax slammed the throttles forward, the Fortune's Echo shuddering as it banked hard to the left. Ion beams lanced across their path. A warning shot. Evasive maneuvers, Thira growled, bracing herself against the console. Jax turned the ship sharply, powering the engines to maximum. The battered vessel responded, though alarms blared as stress built in the newly repaired thrusters. Another volley of beams ripped through space, one grazing the hull with a shower of sparks. Shields at minimal, Jax reported, teeth clenched. We can't take many hits. Thira cursed under her breath. We have to jump out of here. Plot an FTL course. He frantically entered coordinates, eyes flicking to the Imperium ships edging closer. We need a few seconds to spool up the drive, he said. A barrage of laser fire rattled the Fortune's Echo. Jax wrestled with the controls, cursing as the rear thruster spat warnings of overheating. We're not going to make it if they keep hitting us. Thira clenched her jaw, scanning the console. Divert power from the auxiliary systems to the shields, she ordered. We just need a little more time. Jax complied, the lights flickering as the ship rerouted power. Another salvo rocked them, but the shields held for now. The FTL drive whined, inching toward readiness. Almost there, Jax breathed, sweat trickling down his face. The Imperium vessels closed the distance, their weapons glowing ominously. A voice crackled over the comm once more. Final warning. Surrender, or be destroyed. He glanced at Thira, heart hammering. She bared her teeth, her gaze fierce. We do not surrender, she growled. The FTL indicator lit green. Without hesitation, Jax slammed the activation lever. The stars outside elongated, swirling in a kaleidoscope of color. The Fortune's echo vaulted into FTL just as a final blast scraped the shields. Then, they were gone. The Imperium blockade left behind. In the sudden stillness of the corridor, Jax collapsed back in his seat, chest heaving. Thira closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. That was close, she said, voice trembling with suppressed rage. Too close. He nodded, swallowing the dryness in his throat. They must have picked up a tip-off that I was leaving Kareth. Someone sold us out. She punched the console in frustration, leaving a dent. We can't keep running like this. They'll be after us, scanning for our signature wherever we go. Silence wrapped around them, broken only by the hum of the FTL engines. Jack stared at the swirling lights outside, dread coiling in his gut. The bounty was no longer a mere obstacle now. The full weight of the Imperium was upon him. His gaze slid to Thira, whose posture radiated anger and helplessness. He recalled her dream of returning to her shop with new wealth, free to live on her own terms. Now, because of him, that dream was threatened. I'm sorry, he said softly, voice cracking. She shot him a glare, though her eyes held more turmoil than blame. Don't apologize, she snapped. We both chose this path, but we need a plan, a way to get them off your trail for good. He let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand to his forehead. We have the credits. Maybe we can make a deal. Pay someone who has influence in the Imperium. Or maybe there's a place beyond their reach, in the outer reaches. She shook her head. The Imperium extends far, but there are still pockets of space outside their control. We might disappear there, if we're lucky. Exhaustion weighed heavily on Jax's soul. They had succeeded in the smuggling job, but it had only drawn the Imperium's notice. Now they were fugitives on a grander scale, with nowhere to run but deeper into the black. Yet in the gloom of uncertainty, Thira's presence anchored him. He felt her fierce loyalty, her refusal to abandon him despite the danger. A warmth flickered in his chest. Perhaps together, they could find a way out. For now, though, they drifted through the FTL corridor, the swirling lights offering no answers, only a fleeting refuge from the Imperium's reach. Jax guided the Fortune's Echo out of FTL in a remote region of uncharted space, far from standard trade routes. The sensor readings showed nothing but empty void, with a few stray asteroids drifting aimlessly. It's quiet, he noted, scanning the star charts. No major bodies for at least a dozen light years. Thira nodded, though her brow creased with worry. We can't hide here forever. Our supplies won't last indefinitely, he sighed. Agreed. But we need time to come up with a strategy. We can't just appear in civilized space with the Imperium on our tail. They settled into orbit around a small, rocky asteroid. The Fortune's Echo hummed with a subdued energy, as though sharing their exhaustion. Thira rose from her seat, stretching her back muscles. I'll check the cargo hold. Make sure nothing's shifted, she said. Though they had already delivered the prototypes, old habits died hard. Jax watched her go, a maelstrom of guilt and longing swirling within him. He told himself to focus on solutions, on forging a path forward. But the memory of Thira's steadfastness gnawed at him, stirring feelings he could barely name. He busied himself with the ship's systems, rerouting power and checking engine coolant levels. The quiet of space pressed in around him, a vast emptiness that mirrored his own uncertainty. After a while, Thira returned to the cockpit, her expression grim. We have maybe a week's worth of rations if we stretch them. Water's more plentiful, thanks to the recycler. But we'll need more eventually. He nodded, half expecting that news. If we can't go back to known space yet, maybe we can find an independent station that trades in black market goods. She paced, restless. That's risky. Any station might rat you out to the Imperium for a reward, unless we buy them off. But that might not guarantee silence. A heavy silence followed, each weighed down by the knowledge of how precarious their situation had become. At last, Jax spoke, voice trembling with sincerity. Thira, I know this is all because of me, he began, raising a hand when she tried to protest. No. Let me finish. You saved my life back on Kareth, helped me fix the ship, fought bounty hunters, smuggled cargo, and now you're a fugitive from the Imperium. All for me. She crossed her arms, scales glinting in the cockpit's dim light. I made my choice, she said. Nobody forced me. He swallowed hard. Even so, if you want out, if you want to cut ties, I wouldn't blame you, she hissed through her teeth, frustration etched on her features. Don't talk nonsense. We're in this together now. And besides, she paused, tail lashing, as though wrestling with her own emotions. I don't want out. A silence stretched, filled with the unspoken bond that had grown between them. Jax felt his heart pounding. He rose from the pilot's seat, stepping closer to her. Her eyes flicked down, then back up to meet his. For a moment, the threat of the Imperium, the loneliness of the void, all faded. There was only the two of them, a human pilot, a Kareth mechanic, bound by peril and promise. He lifted a trembling hand, gently resting it on her scaled cheek. Her breath hitched, and for an instant, Jax feared she would recoil, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her amber gaze softening. Thira, he whispered, scarcely believing this moment was real. She said nothing, only raised a clawed hand to cover his. Time seemed to slow, the air thick with possibility. Then, in a silent, shared understanding, they closed the distance, their foreheads gently touching. It was not a kiss in the human sense, but an intimate gesture Kareth sometimes used to express closeness or affection. Jax felt her warm breath, the quiet hum of her presence. A wave of tenderness flooded him, mingled with a fierce protectiveness. He didn't know what this meant for the future, for their struggles against the Imperium. But in this fleeting moment, it felt like a promise, a vow that no matter what came next, they would face it together. At last, they pulled apart, each visibly moved. Thira cleared her throat, trying to regain composure. We should figure out our next move, she said. Jax nodded, heat rising in his cheeks. Yes, absolutely, he replied, voice barely steady. They spent the next hour brainstorming options. Could they strike a deal with a powerful crime lord who opposed the Imperium? Could they attempt to forge Jax's identity and slip through official ports? Could they hide in the outer reaches, living off salvage jobs? No plan was certain, no path free of danger, but the spark between them lent Jax a renewed sense of hope. They were not alone in this fight. Ultimately, they decided to take a calculated risk, head to a remote fringe station rumored to be a haven for smugglers and outcasts, beyond the Imperium's usual patrols. There, they might find resources, allies, or at least a place to lay low while forging new identities. Coordinates set, Jax said, punching in the data. We'll have to do a short FTL hop, then drift quietly to avoid detection. Thira exhaled, nodding. Let's do it. The engines roared to life, carrying them away from the lonely asteroid. As the ship slipped into FTL, Jax glanced over at Thira, heart brimming with a strange mixture of determination and affection. Whatever awaited them at the fringe station, whatever threats the Imperium or the Syndicate threw their way, he would not face it alone. And that, for now, was enough to keep him going. The Fortune's Echo emerged from FTL near the coordinates of the fringe station, a place known in hushed tones as Wayfinder's Rest, orbiting a cold, ringed gas giant. Wayfinder's Rest was more myth than fact for most travelers. Yet here, it was a sprawling structure cobbled together from old starship modules and cargo habitats, lit by sporadic neon panels that struggled to pierce the cosmic night. "We're here," Jax breathed, scanning the battered station. Thira stood by his side, arms folded. "Doesn't look like much," she muttered. He cracked a wry grin. "Better than an Imperium prison." "Right," she huffed in amusement. "You have a point." Cautiously, they approached the station. Automated beacons crackled to life, guiding them toward a docking port. The interior comm system buzzed with a scrambled request for identification. Thira transmitted a forged code sequence, one they had prepared during the flight, courtesy of her mechanical expertise and Jax's old smuggler's trick. Miraculously, the station's airlock opened, allowing the Fortune's Echo inside. Jax tensed, half expecting an ambush, but they found only a dimly lit hangar filled with a motley assortment of ships in varying states of disrepair. Securing the Fortune's Echo, they powered down the engines. As the ramp lowered, the stale station air rolled in, tinged with the scent of metal and recycled oxygen. A group of station workers nearby paid them little heed, too busy fussing over a malfunctioning cargo loader. Thira slung a pack over her shoulder, credit chips tucked safely within. "Let's see if we can find the station's quartermaster," she said. "We'll need supplies and a place to stay." Jax nodded, checking his sidearm. They stepped onto the station deck, hearts pounding with the tension of arriving in an unknown den of rogues and outcasts. The corridors were narrow, lit by flickering neon strips. Hooded figures scurried past, eyes averted. Occasional stalls sold questionable goods, spare parts, black market weapons, exotic produce from distant worlds. Eventually, they found a small administrative office manned by a bored-looking Kessrin official, a multi-limbed alien with drooping blue skin. He barely looked up from his ancient data console. "Docking fees," he mumbled, extending a suction-cupped hand. Thira placed a small credit chip in his palm. "We need basic supplies, too, and a berth that ensures privacy," she said. The Kessrin's eyes flicked up, sensing a lucrative opportunity. "Privacy will cost more. Tenants here pay a premium for no questions asked." She handed over another chip. He nodded, tapping the console. "Bay 15 is yours. Don't cause trouble, and trouble won't find you." They left the office, weaving through the crowded thoroughfares. At last, they reached a dingy corridor labeled Bay 15. Inside, they discovered a small space with a bunk, storage lockers, and a battered maintenance terminal. Hardly luxurious, but it offered a locked door and relative solitude. Once inside, Thira set her pack down, glancing around. "Not exactly paradise," she muttered, but there was relief in her tone. Jax locked the door behind them, At least we're not being shot at, he said. They shared a shaky laugh, the tension of countless close calls finally easing. Thira sank onto the bunk, running a hand over her ridged brow. We made it this far, she said, almost disbelieving. Alive. Jax approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. We'll lie low here for a while, gather intel. With our credits, maybe we can bribe the right people to change my identity, or mask our ship's signature. The Imperium might not expect us in this backwater station. She nodded, relief mixing with exhaustion on her features. That's a good plan. A moment passed, the hum of the station's life support droning in the background. Then Thira lifted her gaze to Jax. And after that, once you're free of the bounty, what will you do? He drew a slow breath. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. I always thought I'd go back to a normal life. Maybe run a small shipping outfit. But now, part of me can't imagine going separate ways. She studied him, 1,000 unspoken things shining in her amber eyes. Her voice was uncharacteristically gentle. I've spent so long alone. Jax, maybe I don't want that anymore. He felt a tender ache in his chest. I don't want that either, he said simply. They fell silent, the tension stretching. Then, in a quiet moment that needed no words, Jax reached out, and Thira met him halfway. Their hands, one human, one scaled, clasped. The warmth of their shared resolve washed over them. Yes, the galaxy was still dangerous, still teeming with Imperium hunters and Syndicate enforcers. But they had found a brief refuge, a corner of the stars where they could breathe, plan, and perhaps even forge a life together. Days turned into weeks at Wayfinder's Rest. Jax and Thira bartered for new ship components, updated their forged credentials, and made cautious inquiries about the Imperium's bounty channels. They discovered that after the fiasco of losing Jax at the blockade, the Imperium had withdrawn some of its outer patrols, focusing on other priorities. The Syndicate's interest, too, seemed to wane in the face of uncertain leads. Bit by bit, they chipped away at the edges of Jax's bounty, using credits to grease bureaucratic palms and manipulate data entries. Eventually, one night, Thira returned from a backroom deal with a triumphant gleam in her eye. It's done, she announced. I found someone who can scrub the Imperium registry of your name. They'll reassign the stolen cargo blame to a scapegoat in the system. It cost a fortune, but it's done. Jax felt a flood of emotion relief, gratitude. Disbelief. He pulled her into an impulsive embrace, burying his face against her neck. She stiffened momentarily, then relaxed, returning the gesture. The next day, the changes took effect. Jax checked the station's underworld bounty board. His name had vanished. He was no longer a wanted man. Tears pricked his eyes, and he let out a shaky laugh. Thira stood beside him, arms folded to hide her own emotions, but her eyes shone with pride. You're free, she said. He nodded, voice thick. Yeah, thanks to you. They spent one last week on the station, gathering supplies for the next leg of their journey. No longer forced to hide from the Imperium, Jax felt an uncanny lightness in his step. Yet there was another question on his mind. Where would they go next? At last, the morning came for them to depart. They packed their meager belongings, boarded the Fortune's Echo, and left the dingy Bay 15 behind. Station control granted them clearance without a second glance. The battered vessel rose from the hangar deck, thrusters purring contentedly. Outside, the star-shrouded void beckoned. Jax took the pilot's seat, Thira settling into the co-pilot station. He glanced at her, heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper. Any idea where you want to go? He asked softly. She tilted her head, considering. I've heard rumors of a frontier planet, a place with raw resources, minimal Imperium presence, and opportunities for salvage. We could set up a new shop there, maybe even turn it into a respectable business. He smiled. Sounds like a plan. Let's try it. And so, with a gentle push of the throttles, they launched into the black. The swirling cosmos stretched before them, infinite possibilities gleaming in distant suns. Thira charted a course for this rumored frontier, and Jax engaged the FTL drive. As the stars blurred into streaks of light, Jax reached for Thira's hand, feeling the scales warm beneath his touch. She squeezed back, a quiet affirmation that they were in this together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. In the end, the alien mechanic had saved his life, repaired not just his broken ship, but the shattered hope he thought he'd lost. And though she demanded a favor in return, what they found went far beyond a simple transaction. They found a shared future, forged on the edges of lawless space, a union of two outcasts who refused to surrender, a love that defied the boundaries of species and circumstance. And as the fortune's echo soared onward, leaving old debts and old ghosts behind, they embraced a new beginning together, ready to face whatever wonders and perils the galaxy had yet to reveal.